You are live. Let me see if I believe that. This happens so quickly every time. I just wonder if it's actually true or not. We'll give it a second here to catch up. I know there's a little bit of a lag, but I definitely want to make sure everybody can hear us and see us and everything's good to go before we dive into the weeds.
Cool.
Actually, I put a TV in my office not that long ago. So this is the first time I actually put the stream on the TV. So it's like an extra monitor over here for me today. So we're giant over there. I just got to make sure I can't hear it. I can't hear it though, so that's good. Sweet. We got lots of people here. 70 people already waiting for the stream, which is super awesome. I'm excited about that. I want to get into tons of stuff today. Jake, hello. You said we're live. Yes. Excellent. All right. Sounds like we're good to go here. Oh, and you got your first dig in the stash comment. So
I was just saying how this really makes it official. Now it's always going to be on the internet. My wife is thrilled.
You have to keep it now. There's no going back at this point.
Might as well.
Yeah. We got Brian Jackson watching today. Good to see you, Brian. David got the notification. Sweet. They're going out then. That's fantastic. Well, let's start talking about what we're going to do here today. Taylor, Tom did a live stream with me last year. We went through some stuff too. So this will be a nice update to that. So the goal today is to talk about the new 1.9 alpha release and Pro 1.7 release. There are just a ton of things inside this update. Tom and I have probably had 3 calls in the past 2 months or so. And every time we do, he shows me more and more stuff that was there the whole time and I just never saw it. So hopefully we'll get to uncover some stuff for you today and kind of show you what went on behind the scenes on some of these things. What's really neat about some of this is I know a lot of it's just like line items on a change log, but there's so much that goes into making all this happen and how this differs from other systems that have done something similar. So I'm excited about having Tom here to share all that with you today because I could never repeat it all. So it's good to have him here. And I also collected a bunch of questions from random Facebook posts and emails and all that. So I have some of those questions here. I also want to talk about kind of the future. I know I feel greedy. We just got like everything we asked for. And now I want to ask Tom, what's next? But I definitely want to go over some of the future things. There's some really cool things coming along to WordPress. And I'm excited to hear what Tom thinks about how those might be integrated into his products as well. So, and I got to keep an eye here on the chat. I have it pulled up here through StreamYard, which should make it fairly easy for me to pull questions up on the screen. If you do have questions you want me to ask, drop them in the chat and I will do my best to ask those. If they're like pertinent to what we're talking about right at that specific time, I might interrupt and ask those, but otherwise I'm going to kind of hold all those questions to the end. So sweet. That's all my spiel, Tom. How are things going for you this morning?
Things are great. It's Monday, but it was a good weekend. We got a lot of snow here. So Friday, Saturday, I was shoveling a lot of snow and we kind of stayed inside because it was cold, but watched some Avengers movies and chilled out, which was nice after a busy week.
You know, we moved somewhere a little bit cooler, but the one thing on my list was I don't ever want to have to shovel snow. I've never done it before and I never want to do it.
Saturday was, it might have been the most snow that I've ever shoveled. It was pretty epic. And I'm looking at, we just moved here, Calgary in Canada, very cold. We just moved here last March, so it's almost been a year, but all my neighbors have like fancy snow blowers and I'm out there with a shovel. I'm just putting in work.
You're going to have to get after it.
Yeah.
We're going to have to made it a competition.
I got mine done before my neighbor and he had a blower. So I was going hard.
Oh, there you go. I was going to say, we'll have to sell extra copies of GenerateBlocks today to afford a snowblower.
Yeah. Yeah. It's on the list for sure.
No doubt. All right. Well, let's jump in here. I think the first thing, obviously, it's been a while since a new big version of GenerateBlocks came out. We're just in alpha now, but a lot went into this release. Seems like it was like 6-7 months ago since we got the last one. So I know y'all have not been just sitting around twiddling your thumbs. How much time and hours went into this release?
Yeah, it was about 8 months since we started development on the new pattern library, because that's where it kind of started. We were looking at our current one, and our current pattern library was just kind of like, it's cool, but it's more like a show off of like what you can do. It's not super useful. You can't sit there and just build a site from it without having to unpick a ton of opinion. So we kind of knew that a new pattern library was necessary. So that was about eight 8 months ago. So we're, well over 1,000 hours went into this release. And it wasn't supposed to be that way, but it seems to happen to me quite a lot is, we start to build something like this and it's like, okay, so we have this new library, great, wireframed up, great. But global styles, like, are we going to use the current global style system, which, it did its job, but it had a lot of flaws to it. And I didn't love the architecture behind it. So it turned into, let's do a new pattern library to we need a new global style system. And that's what took the bulk amount of time, especially because I must have rewritten it 3 or 4 times along the way. I know the first time I showed you is completely different to what it actually ended up being at the end. So yeah, I probably rewrote it maybe three times until we finally got to a point where I was super happy with just the underlying framework that it has. And I don't think there's not a lot of ways we could have made it better when it comes to the actual code side of it. So super happy with it. I'm glad we took our time on it. Yeah,
that's one thing a lot of me and other fanboys of Generate products will talk about is like, yeah, it might take a little bit longer for us to get some of these updates, but when we do, we feel pretty confident they were the right solution. So you said you rewrote this a couple of times, and I know you showed me maybe in like November or December of last year, one of the first iterations of it. Like you said, a lot changed. So when you look at that and you've put in all that work, and what is it that makes you go, you know what, I need to actually redo this? Like, are you that picky or was there just so much better opportunities?
I'm really picky, too picky a lot of the time, especially because a lot of this stuff you'll never really end up seeing. But it's, when you're doing something like this, a ton of it is the UI. A ton of it has to, it has to be usable. A ton of it is the UX as well, right? But a lot of it is the overall developer experience too. So, we could have really easily just mashed it together and ended up with the same result that you end up seeing. But the underlying stuff was really, really important to me with this release. We got it to the point where if you said, hey, Tom, you're missing list style stuff, list style type, and this and that, we could go in now and it would take about 30 seconds to add that. And it would just plug in and work. And it would work across all of your selectors, all of your out rules. The CSS is automatically minified for you using post CSS. Like, the whole system is just kind of plug and play now. And that's where I really wanted it to get to, where from now on, when we go to improve this thing, it's minimal work. And the beautiful thing about it as well is there's minimal kind of points that can break on us as well. It's just a system now that you plug into and it's good to go. Which, from a developer standpoint, moving forward with all the stuff we want to do, I really wanted to get this out of the way because it opens up a lot of doors.
Yeah, it's like a lot of the foundational stuff that needed to go in place.
Yep.
So we're going to go through the changelog here. I figured that was the easiest for us to just make sure we catch everything. I'm sure some of these things we'll talk about more than others, but before we jump into those specifically, I wanted to ask you which feature you were most proud of inside this update.
Well, global styles for sure. Global styles. Yeah, I mean, we've been wanting to do something like this for a while, especially with the underlying architecture behind it. It's something I wanted to put into the local blocks, but that is a huge undertaking when it comes to kind of backwards compatibility and all that kind of stuff. So this was an awesome opportunity to take something we've been thinking about for a couple years and see if it actually works. And now that it works, we will be putting it into the local blocks as well once we kind of iron out some of the stuff. But global styles, like the way it works, the way that it's built, it's probably the best piece of code that I've ever been a part of.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. All right. And what would you say was the most challenging part of this? Same answer, or was there other things that were difficult?
I mean, probably the same answer. You know, whenever you have something like that ends up being something you're proud of and something that took that much time, it's going to come with its the hard things. And I mean, probably what's kind of funny is the underlying system was probably the easiest part. The UI was the hardest part, especially when we get into selectors and all that kind of stuff. Making it where it is super flexible, probably too flexible, but usable was definitely super challenging. And we still have some work to do there to get it to a point that we're truly happy with.
Yeah, I know. Even I got an alpha version like 2 days before you publicly released it, and I recorded a bunch of my videos off of that version. And then by the time you actually came out with the alpha 2 days later, there's several UI things that have already gotten updated. So I know I tried to let that sneak through in my videos, but the cat's out of the bag now.
Yep.
All right, I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm going to pop open the change log, which I have pulled up here on GenerateBlocks. You can go to GenerateBlocks. I usually just scroll down to the bottom and click this change log button in the footer if you want to follow along on your end. But I thought we'd just go through some of these and kind of talk about this. I have a sandbox install as well that we can demonstrate any of this in. I'm going to do my best to do that and keep an eye here on questions. So if you have a question that is, that pertains to what we're talking about, definitely drop it in there, and I'm going to do my best to catch it. But keep in mind, I'm watching about 5 different things at once. So I do see people asking anytime for questions. I guess this is a good one. As the first thing that's on this changelog list is the global style system. And it, you know, in a changelog, it says new global style system, which is a very abbreviated term for what we have here. And essentially what we've got is the ability to write and edit classes from inside the editor. And we got a question here asking what actually inspired you to embrace the class first workflow?
Oh man, I mean, it's the way that I've always built stuff. It was what the original global styles was kind of supposed to be at the time, though. When I first built that, I mean, my knowledge of the system was far less than it is now. And then Gutenberg itself wasn't exactly what it is now. At the time, it would have been really hard to do this because the markup inside of the actual what we're seeing now, it just wasn't clean enough to use a class-based system like this. You needed two separate CSS things so you could target inside of the editor and then target the front end as well. Where now, because of how clean the markup has gotten, we're using the stuff that you create in here, the CSS you create in here is the CSS that gets loaded on the front end. There's no 2 versions of this thing. It just is what it is. So, I mean, it's always been what I've wanted to create. It's just now it kind of became realistic.
Yeah, and we've seen several builders move to that system, and it obviously makes a huge difference in terms of how maintainable your site is and how consistent you can make things across your site. So for people that hadn't watched any videos, seen anything added to GenerateBlocks yet, again, we're talking about the alpha version. It's not, you're not going to see an update in your dashboard unless you go looking for it. I have had a couple questions about that, people that hadn't seen it. So when you install it, most of this here looks the same, except you see this new box here for add or create a style. This is the new global styles section. You used to have to go in the back end of the website under GenerateBlocks, click local style or global styles, and then you had a whole separate kind of post type system for it. And now it's right here inside the editor. So if I was going to decide what I wanted the H2s, or let's just say, you know, the section headlines, whatever we wanted to call them inside of my website, where I can just add a class here. I'm just going to say section headlines, and we'll hit create. And when we do that, we're going to be presented with this, where we're able to add a blank style or clone an existing style. I'm just going to start with a blank one. And now we have this new style editor, essentially. I don't know what you call this panel. What do you call this panel?
I call it a styles builder.
Okay, so yeah. We have the new styles builder here. And this looks similar to what you have just at the block level here, as far as we have a bunch of different accordions and everything's kind of sectioned out. You can tell the difference. This one now doesn't have the icons next to it. So it's a little bit easier to tell which one's which. But in here, we have a whole lot more control. As Tom was talking about earlier, we can do lots of things with selectors here as far as targeting the selector itself or the hover state or links within it. We can click on more and get to some of these other pre-made ones, or we can click new and start typing away to add any kind of selector we want to this. So almost limitless possibilities. We do have to target a class first, so we can't just directly target like an HTML element at this point. But you could target a class and then HTML elements inside of it. So once you do that, at this point, when you're styling this, you're actually styling the class for this element, not the element itself. So just as a demonstration, I'm going to say, let's make this headline. I don't know. We ought to make it really big so it's very obvious. 90 pixels. And then we'll say, how about we change the color to a bright blue color. Now, anytime across this website, no matter where I want to add a headline, when I add a new headline block, and we'll just add one. And this one, we won't even make an H2. We'll just make it a paragraph. And we'll say, copy that. Now, if I add the same section headlines class to it, it's going to apply all those same styles, the 90 pixels that I put on that class, as well as the blue color. So that's the really dumbed down version of the new global styles, essentially, but it definitely gets deeper than that. So I don't know how deep we want to go on these specifically. But I think one thing that's going to be really important for people is brushing up on their knowledge of CSS. I think if you're the kind of person who's never wrote any code, never wrote any CSS, doesn't know how all your selectors and all that work, this area of the builder might be a little bit more difficult for you. Good thing is you guys have left the old part of this alone, the block level styling alone. You can keep using that just as you did before. However, once you start learning about how all these selectors work and how you can target things, I think you're going to open up a lot of possibilities in here that didn't exist before. So is there anything in here that you think is really important to cover that I didn't cover in this brief outline?
Well, I mean, this is definitely an advanced feature, and having a general knowledge of CSS is certainly helpful. And I was super aware of that as we were building this thing. The idea behind it kind of is that we really took a lot of time to create the engine that can really do anything, super powerful, super extendable. But now what we can start to do as well is kind of build a safety net on top of it. And we'll be doing that a lot with the local blocks as well. So say you have a button and, you know, we kind of bring this over to the local blocks. Your average user doesn't know that a button needs to be, you know, display inline block or inline flex. They don't know a lot of this stuff. But what we're able to do now is create this layer on top that all it does is it directly communicates with the styles builder, and it creates the CSS for you without you ever having to actually go in there and do it yourself. It's also why we have the massive pattern system, is to hopefully bridge that gap a little bit as well, where people don't necessarily have to, you know, learn to become a coder in order to use this, because that's really important, right? But having the system there that we can plug into now gives us a lot of opportunity to kind of build those safety nets on top of this thing as well.
Yeah, and I think back to when a couple years ago, I couldn't have spelt CSS, let alone done anything with it. And I started using the Oxygen builder, and that is a class-based system like this where you're writing styles to classes. And because I started using that, I had to start learning a lot more about CSS, or at least it invited me to learn a lot more about CSS. And after going down that rabbit hole and now feeling pretty confident in my abilities with CSS, it's been a total game changer for me. So I think this is a great, if nothing else, it's a great opportunity for those who haven't been doing anything with CSS or learning any code to start diving into those things. And what's nice about doing it inside of a builder like this versus if you're just in a code editor hacking away is this kind of has all those little visual cues, because you're not having to type out all the things. You pick from a list of options, right? And that's one of the hard things when you're writing CSS, is just getting used to, okay, how is the syntax of all of this work? And how, did I forget a semicolon somewhere? You don't have to worry about missing semicolons when you're in here just clicking buttons in the UI, which is definitely a huge benefit of this.
Right. And some of the controls that we did as well, especially when it comes to like box shadows, backgrounds, stuff like that, I'll still trip up when I'm writing it sometimes.
Yeah.
But the controls allow you to just create those. You can, have multiple background images. You can have multiple box shadows, all this stuff, and you just do it right from in the control. And the controls are so cool. Like, they read the CSS and they build themselves based off the CSS. So it's not even like there's no, settings, this or that. It's the controls are going, okay, give me CSS. And I can look at it and go, okay, we have 3 box shadows, and the controls build themselves based on your CSS that you can then use the controls to tweak it. It's super, super cool.
Yeah, I think about like when I've gone back and tried to just test my skills of let me write some HTML and CSS to build a website. I absolutely hate writing HTML. I'm like so spoiled to WordPress. I just like click headline and start typing a headline. I don't have to think about how to write all this. And HTML definitely trips me up. But that's essentially what we're doing here with CSS, is we don't have to remember how to write all the CSS. We just got to click the buttons in here. I do have some questions coming in on this feature that I think are interesting in asking you now. One that I know me and you had a bunch of back and forth on, and then you guys had a bunch of back and forth on internally. Kevin said, recommendation. I don't know about calling them global styles. That's a bit confusing related to true global styles, as in a global element styling and or global variables, colors, etc. So we talked about this several occasions. So why don't you tell us a little bit about why you decided on keeping the global styles name rather than just saying classes, maybe, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, I went back and forth on this in the code a few times as well. It started off named utility classes, and then it went to global classes, and then it went to global styles, and back to just regular styles. The reason we didn't go with classes is that the idea that you're creating a class, I mean, the class part of it is only one small piece of what you're actually doing. You're creating a collection of selectors, a collection of, based off the class, but you're creating more than just a class. You're creating a collection of styles based off of a selector. So, if you're just going in there and like you just did here, creating a headline class, then yeah, you created a class. And if you go look at the CSS, it's exactly what you did. The moment you start, selecting the icon inside that class, the moment you start selecting, the hover and the focus within, and you're targeting the SVG, or you're doing this or that, what you're actually doing is you're building a collection of styles. Now, global styles, does it need the global part? We had this discussion a lot as well. The only reason we kept the global part is we're also going to have local styles to the block, right? So it just kind of made sense. Like, you're going to have your local styles, you're going to have your global styles. To your point, Kevin, about things like CSS variables and stuff, it's actually what I want to build into this soon, is the ability to, as you enter a value like the 90 pixel font size that you did, is the ability to just turn on, is just to create a global CSS variable from that value right there, and have that as another part of the system, which you can then very easily use within this overall system. So there's that part of it. The other part of it is maybe it won't always just be classes. Maybe in the future we turn on tag names. Maybe you'll be able to style your body. Maybe you'll be able to style the H2s. This is a styles builder, right? And the cool thing about it is the way that we built it, it's just a package that we can just take and put somewhere else. So you can imagine, we could go put this inside of GP. We can, call them selectors. Yeah, we definitely could have. That's more true to what they are. They are selectors. You're building a collection of selectors. Now, whether people will understand what that means is tricky as well. But you could say the same thing about global styles. Naming things is one of one of the harder parts about building stuff like this, which is kind of funny because, it's a complex system that took a lot of time. Naming things is hard. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a tricky part of all of it that I know as we add classes to things, we're going to realize how difficult it is to name things. And that's only half as difficult as
Yeah.
what you came up with here. We did have people asking if we can use nested selectors, which I just kind of demonstrated on the screen. Here, when you're in your global styles, you can click on this more button and click new, and you have the ability to kind of build out your selector right here. So for instance, this one, let's see, where did it go? We'll just go back to our main one here.
You got to cancel out of there because it remembers you wanted to create one.
Okay, there we go. All right, so here I targeted the direct child div and then an H2 inside of that. So I've made this selector really freaking specific for no reason, but it gives us the ability to use things like direct descendants and siblings and things like that right here inside the builder, as well as HTML elements rather than classes. So you do have to start with the class. I think Tom kind of said it's more of a guardrail than anything, that if I just go add a new class to something, even if I don't put a dot, we'll say no dot and hit create, it's automatically going to put the period before it and turn this into a class. So the first selector that you put in there has to be a class.
And that's 100% a guardrail. The system doesn't actually care whatsoever. So if at some point we decide, we're going to turn this into a full-fledged theme styler, it's super easy just to take that out and off you go. The system, that's one of the cool things about this system, is it doesn't care. Same with the @ rules you have there. Like we gave you some, right? But the system doesn't care. It just looks for @ rules. So you can imagine, soon in the future, you'll be able to do like container queries and the system just knows how to handle them. Same as like print rules or any sort of @ rule you want. That's my favorite thing about this system, is it doesn't care. It just creates and parses CSS exactly how the browser does, basically.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I definitely saw lots of comments come in here. I tried to parse through some of these, but it's a little difficult to go through all of them. So we might have to do a bunch of questions at the end here. Although
cool.
We did get asked if there will ever be a Harry Styles, which I think is the question of the stream so far. So I appreciate that one. All right. So the next thing on our bingo list here is extend new pattern library with the Pro collection. Now we're looking at the Pro changelog here. Maybe we should have started here with the free version, but the new pattern library. So I should have probably opened up an old version of GenerateBlocks just to show what the difference is here, but let's forget the past and just dive right into the future. There's an entirely
see it on the website as well if you want. There's the pattern library part on the website.
That's true. Let me zoom out here. So before you could insert basically a pattern library block. It would open up a modal, and then you'd essentially have this screen where you can insert any of these pre-made, fully styled sections of a website, essentially. The new one does not do quite that. If we click on this here, let's see. All right, so now when we go to open pattern library, it's going to take a second here, and we'll talk about why it takes a half second here in a moment. But what you see in this now is not completely designed out sections. It's essentially wireframe patterns. So why don't you tell us about the change in this? You said this is kind of where this entire thing started.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to get to a point where you could build out your entire page or even your entire website, or even, train AI to do it for you, where you have this massive collection of basic components. And these components, there's no opinion put into them. They come with, I think there's maybe 13 global styles that we added to these that will automatically get imported into your site when you add them. So it'll only add the ones that you actually add to your page. And what's cool here is that you can go in and do a couple things like you're doing here. And then if you go back into the pattern library, you'll notice that immediately
I added that very specific rule on there to like target the div inside and then the H2 inside of that, and now that's kicking my butt, and I don't remember what class I added it to.
No dot.
I think GB
section.
No, that's not it either. See, I shouldn't have. Maybe just section. I added 2 specific rules, so we'll delete that out of there. All right, deleted. Okay, let me get rid of all these extra ones I added on there to find that now. And we'll kind of start back from scratch. So when we import these blocks, I added this on there as well too. Some of the elements within them are going to have classes already on them. So like for instance, this headline has a class of GBP-section __ headline. And that gives us the ability to go in here and make changes to this, and anywhere that class is being used is going to get updated. So I did this in a demonstration. I'll just do the same thing to make it easy to see here. So we can go back to what Tom was saying. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I had screwed up. We'll make this giant 90 pixels font size, and we'll make it red. And we'll go ahead and save this because we need to save that class to the system.
I'm not sure you do. You might. I haven't tried that. It might be smart enough to just know.
I don't think it will pull them back in the. We're not going to see the live preview until we save the class, I don't believe.
Okay.
But I might be wrong. I mean, you did this, not me.
Yeah,
but
I did a lot of things.
All right. So now, because we made a change to this class that's within this pattern, this same class is used on a lot of the patterns throughout the library. So now when we open this up, you'll see all those headlines that were smaller and the dark gray color before are now what we've changed them to the red and the big headline. And what you're actually seeing here isn't a static screenshot of those previews. It's actually a dynamic preview showing what this section is going to look like with your website styling on it.
Yeah. And I mean, that's throughout the whole thing. So, I mean, one of the main things I wanted to do when we were doing patterns is these buttons. And it's like, hey, these buttons, but they have this local styling on it. Like, what a pain that is to insert all these things and have to go in and do the same thing over and over and over again. Even if you have to go in and like add your own class or do your own stuff, it's just a pain, right? So this really takes that pain away, where you can come in here, make some changes. Maybe maybe there's a bit too much section padding. Maybe the headline's not where you want it to be. The button's not using your brand color, whatever. You can make those changes one time and then come in here and continue using these to wireframe your site. I thought it was a huge win to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I think about what I've done for clients here recently, and clients actually love this and pay extra for it, which is awesome, is I will take sections that I developed for their website and save them into the pattern library, the old pattern library, and name them so they could reuse them later. And my selling point on that was, I'm going to create you an entire library of sections of your website that are already done for you, pre-styled, mobile responsive, all the settings are done. You can just drag and drop them in there, and it's kind of like building with Legos if you need to add a new page to your website. And what we have here is now I don't have to create all those. Once I style the classes on any of these, it'd pretty much be done for them. I know we had somebody asking here if we can import and export your own wireframes. I didn't realize this when I first opened it, but up here there's a manage libraries kind of settings button. Maybe the local doesn't show up till we create one.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to just say that, let's see, we'll get rid of what we brought in here. Okay, so this is the demo I did a second ago. I'm going to go ahead and create a pattern. So I'll click here and we'll just say demo pattern. We can give it a category if we like. We can sync or unsync it. I know we had a question about partially synced patterns too. Go ahead and update this just in case we need to. And now if we open the pattern library and we click this manage libraries button, we have the option for our local pattern. So once you've created a local pattern, you can enable that and see those here inside the editor. So now we can actually see that live preview of the pattern we created. Again, it's not taking a screenshot of it. In the old patterns library, you actually had to take a screenshot and then upload it as the featured image to see the preview. This is bringing it all in dynamically, which is pretty neat. And this is actually using the core pattern library, right? The setup for core patterns. So exporting, importing, all those things are pretty simple, right?
Yep. Yeah, what we did there is we basically added one extra taxonomy to it, which is a collections one. So what you see at the top there, free, pro, and local, those are different libraries. But when you do it locally, if you create a new collection, it'll act as its own library. So by default, it's going to add that local collection to it, but you can create your own. So you could do like a components one and then put your button in there and your headlines in there, and then you can do it. You can do like a different one and have these separate libraries for. Yeah, so this is Core's create patterns. So they give you categories, which we use as well on the left. You can't choose a collection there.
Oh, okay.
I wonder if we could. I mean, knowing how they build some of this core stuff, maybe not, but it's definitely worth a look. So you can see now if you go in there, you should have a category on the left if you used it. Not there. I'll have to check that out.
Okay.
So we have categories on the left. We have collections up top. The reason we called them collections and not libraries is we're going to be releasing something called Generate Cloud, which basically allows you to set up a local site like this, take a series of collections and put them into a single library. And then that plus sign that you just clicked there, which we probably maybe should take away for right now because Generate Cloud doesn't exist yet. It's actually completely built and ready to go. We just have to release it. You can then add that from your own website somewhere, your own server, your own cloud, and add that as a librarian. So if you say have a collection of classes you use frequently for your clients, and you have a collection of heroes and team sections and feature sections and pricing tables that you use a lot, maybe you don't want to use our class naming structure inside of our pro library. You want to define your own. You'll be able to do that in Generate Cloud and then add that as a library to the pattern library. And that's it. So you wouldn't even necessarily have to go and export all of your global styles and import them. It'll do it for you, only the ones you need as you build out your client's wireframe or your website. So that's coming really soon. It's actually, it was built into this version and we took it out because it was just so much to pack into one thing and to test at one time and to get out. So we're going to be releasing it shortly, which I'm really excited about.
So I'm guessing, will that be a part of your pro subscription to GenerateBlocks, or will that be an additional subscription needed?
Yeah, that's a part of what we need to figure out. It may be like a higher tier thing, especially because it's something that's typically only going to be necessary for people that are building a lot of websites for clients. So it may be like a higher tier thing. It might just be all tiers. That's the part we need to figure out before we release it.
Excellent. Max asked here too, as far as the classes that are added to things inside of the pro library, that there are only a few numbers of classes, right? It's not like hundreds of classes added to these, right?
No, I think it's 13. It was 13. We may have trimmed it down a little bit, but it's around that number. And what's cool about it is, some of them might have to be really specific to like maybe card styles that you end up not using. Those aren't going to be brought into your website. Only the ones that you're using are going to be brought into your website.
And as far as like partially synced patterns, so right now we have just patterns, which are one-off instances of something, and as soon as you change it, it doesn't affect other copies of it. We have synced patterns where when you make a change to one, it's going to make a change to all of them across the website. And what I believe is coming in WordPress pretty soon is partially synced patterns. So is that something you're already working on, how that's going to be implemented with GenerateBlocks? Or because you built it all through their library, you don't even have to worry about it?
Exactly. That was one of the reasons why we decided to do away with our own custom post type that we had in the previous GenerateBlocks Pro version, because when we created that, like WordPress didn't have patterns. They just had reusable blocks. They weren't called patterns. They weren't thought of as patterns. So we had to create our own custom post type for it. Now that's not the case, and it just seems silly to compete with something within Core that not only does the exact same thing, but they're going to improve it, and it would be nice if we could just benefit from those improvements automatically. Yeah, they might. And then we'll be in trouble once they rename this thing again.
Yeah.
But for now, hopefully this is just what it is, and they are patterns. But yeah, we kind of get to benefit from the work that they're doing there, as well as the things like you showed where you can create a pattern right from the block. We were going to do that from ours, but it seemed like, so you'll have create a pattern and create a GB pattern. It just didn't make any sense. So overall, it made a lot of sense just to take a step back, go with their core post type, but still add our library with, the things inside of it that we think are important.
Yeah, and one thing I was telling Tom that I actually really love about this system too is one thing I will do is just, let's say I'm going to add a container here, and I'm going to be essentially creating a section for my site. I'm going to create hundreds of sections on my site, right? I'm going to do this 100 different times. And if I have to say, okay, I want 80 pixels of padding here and 24 on the left and right, of course I could add a class, but then I have to remember to add the inner container as well. And I might want to do specific styling to that. Now I can create this one time. Let's say I got this exactly the way I want it. I can just go in here and hit create pattern. I can say section hyphen default. We'll turn off synced and I'll hit create. I'm going to update this just in case I have to, maybe even refresh so I don't screw too much up. But one thing that's great about this being built into the core pattern library is now I can just / and start typing, and it's going to automatically pull up any of those patterns. So this is the one we just created, and now I can just easily add a section into my page. So I think this is one thing most of us don't like about other page builders is I'm going to pick on a specific element block or whatever, like the icon block where it comes with like an icon and a headline and text underneath it, right? It's like this compound element with several different things inside of it. But it's not flexible because if you don't want to show the headline or the icon, then you need a completely different block or element or whatever it may be. But this system allows us to just have all the building blocks, the headline, the icon, the container, whatever it may be. We can arrange those into a pattern that we like, save it as a pattern, and be able to bring it in that easily, which means we don't need an icon block or like an icon headline block or whatever. You know what I mean?
What's cool too is because of global styles, and hopefully Kevin's not wincing every time I say global styles.
Well,
but because of global styles, this is already kind of a partially synced pattern because you can, what you just did, where you can, instead of have that locally, put that into a class, and now all you're doing is changing the content within these, which is exactly what partially synced patterns are going to be. So it's kind of cool that even without them adding that as a feature, it already kind of does that.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Okay, well, somebody's making the joke that 30 minutes in, we've only gotten to 2 of the items on the change log so far. So we better go back to that.
It's the smallest change log I've ever had to write out, which is funny because it's the largest code change I've ever done. Luckily, a lot of it is just in those 2 things we looked at. So
yeah, I was going to say a lot of this, I don't think we have to spend a lot of time on. I'll read them off in case there's anything particular you need to tell me. But some of these things, I don't even know if they're worth talking about. So this next feature on the list is added opt-in defaults for cache filter. No idea what this means, so you'll have to tell me.
Okay, so I mean, we had someone on GitHub come. They created a massive page of blocks. I think there was like over 100 blocks, and there was a performance thing happening where we have to fetch the defaults for all the styles of that block. This is the downside of our current local styling is we have to define if we want font size tablet, we have to define font size tablet. And if we want, background color hover, we have to define it and we have to give them defaults. Over time, as that list grows, you're going to run into problems like this. So what I did for now, simply for this user, is create this kind of filter that will cache those defaults. The reason I didn't do it and have it turned on by default is caching can be a pain. And I really didn't want to cause a bunch of problems just because of this problem that is likely not going to be a problem moving forward once we move the new styles object into the local blocks. The styles object that runs global styles is one attribute we have to define. Within it, all of your data goes. So we're not going to have this kind of massive defaults thing going on. But I wanted to add that in for now, just for those users out there using the current system that maybe having hundreds of blocks on a page, that this will, improve performance on that page.
Absolutely. All right, perfect. Another one in here, added new GenerateBlocks do inline styles filter to force inline styles if needed.
Right. So what happens when your page loads up with the local blocks is we do a quick check of the content to see if we have any of our blocks within it that we have to style. Now, if for some reason you're adding a block not in the content, it may be inside of a hook or whatever, we have a fallback where it will actually add the styling as a style tag right above the element, which is the inline style. So it's just a fallback. Now, sometimes what we found is our system can't know everything. So there were people in support that were going, hey, like I have to force this inline style to happen because of X, Y, and Z. So we added a filter in there where you can basically bypass the check to kind of force that inline style check. And then we actually ended up using it within the pattern library, because for the preview that you see happens live, we needed to force that inline style check. So
perfect. All right, we'll go back to it here. Press the right buttons. All right, feature, add styles indicator to local block controls if global styles exist. So this is definitely a handy one. If I go back in here and we add a headline block, I'll just demonstrate this quickly. And I add that class I made earlier. Section headlines was the class I added. On that section's headline class, I changed the color and I changed the font size. So now when we go in here, we see under typography, we can see this global badge, which is saying, hey, there's something globally styling, like a global style controlling this. And we can see there's an indicator here next to the font size. And if we go down here under colors, not one next to colors. So interesting on that one.
Yeah, there's a bug happening there.
Okay. Well, again, we're testing alpha versions here. We also have the, like in the class, the color's actually in the typography panel too. So that makes things a little bit different here. But these badges are really handy, so you know what is controlling one thing or another. And one thing that Jonathan did on his stream that I didn't even realize is you can actually click on these little dots and it'll tell you what the value is that's being shown here. And if you hit edit source, it will take you into that headline. I know one thing he mentioned is it'd be cool if it opened up the panel wherever that is. I don't know how difficult that is, but definitely handy to have all those there so you know where styles are coming from in case you're lost.
Yep. Yeah, that wasn't an easy thing to do. Shout out to Ian who created that. I don't know if he's watching, but he's probably shaking his head because of that bug that we just saw. Although I did create an issue over the weekend about a bug regarding this as well. It was actually a super complicated thing to do because this feature is actually parsing the HTML and the CSS and looking to see if there's any, see, there he is. Learn WP. So it was a super complicated feature to do because it's actually reading the CSS and looking up to see if it's inheriting anything. It'll become simpler when we bring the local styles, the global styles inspector controls into the local block. It'll become a lot easier as well. But yeah, super cool feature, really, really handy.
Yeah, and I didn't even realize it was there. I guess while we're kind of talking about some of these things, and maybe we're just going back to talking about global styles now, but a couple things that I know people have ran into here. So let's say because old habits die hard, you add a new block and you start doing a bunch of changes to it. You say, I want that to be 90 and I want the color to be red. And then you go, oh shit, I should have been doing this on a class. You can still add a new class here. I'm so good at naming things. Hit create. And when you hit create, you can actually, you have options here. You can start blank, which means none of these styles would come over. You can clone an existing style, which means we can go in here and actually pick from one of our styles that we've already created. So that might be good if you're creating like a modifier. So if you're using like BIM naming conventions and you create some kind of modifier to an element, you could copy those styles and they'd already be on there. You can copy all the local block styles. So if you copy them, they're going to be on the local block and on the class, or you can move all the styles. So in this case, if I accidentally wrote them to the local block and I want to move them over to the class, I can just hit move local block styles and hit start editing. And you can see now that color and that font size is now on this global style and not on the local block itself, which is super handy. The other thing I know we had questions on before, I hadn't seen them come up here, but all these global styles are saved over here in the back end under Generate Blocks, Global Styles, and you see all the classes we added here. I think there's probably some planned improvements or some opportunities for improvements to this screen eventually, but you can display all the styles here if you just need to see the CSS. But you can also drag and drop all of these, which it's not clear why you'd want to do that necessarily until you start talking about the importance of the order of your CSS in the file. So why don't you talk to us about why this functionality exists and maybe what kind of upgrades we might see to this screen eventually?
Yeah, I mean, CSS is cascading, right? So the stuff at the bottom is going to overwrite the stuff at the top. So it became apparent that as we were creating these, as a kind of a silly example, but maybe I created my secondary button styles first, and then I went and created my primary button styles afterwards. My primary button styles aren't going to necessarily work because, oh man, what did I say? You create the secondary first, create the primary, and now my secondary button isn't going to show, say, like a different background color because the primary button has a background color set and it's showing up after. So the order of your CSS is really important, which that allows you to do. So if you say are running into some sort of specificity problem, you can come in here and just reorder things as you need, and it'll fix that problem for you.
I imagine many support tickets in the future might be solved by dragging and dropping one of these above the other.
Yeah, but with the selector system, like that example I just gave, like maybe you would create a primary button and you would just, using the selector system, add a secondary class to it and change the background color. And now all you need to do is add your primary buttons and add a secondary class using additional CSS classes. And you have a primary and secondary button using one global style.
Absolutely. So a couple things about this page that we're just going to make feature requests at this point, Tom. So sorry to bring you on here for that, but I can imagine right now I have, like a handful of classes. It's pretty easy for me to see what's here, but eventually I build out an entire website. There might be 100 different selectors in here. And if I need to go find something to fix it, I think maybe some kind of search feature in here could be handy to be able to find things. And then Jake just mentioned here inside the YouTube chat, he said, do you think we'll ever have the ability to edit the CSS for a class directly within this area? So I'm guessing if you go here and we display styles, of course, there's nothing on that one that I choose. So we'll go here to be able to go in here and just write CSS if you wanted to and save it to that style. Do you think that will be possible?
Ian? Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Ian, we should have just brought you on. It sounds like you're in charge of all this.
Yeah, this kind of stuff is totally doable simply because of how the styles object works. Like I said, it doesn't care. So you can come in here. We also want to do it within the actual global styles area where maybe, you go in and you can just create properties and values, and it doesn't care what you're doing as long as it's valid CSS. So, I mean, there could be a future where you have a set of, selectors and styles that you pop in here and it just creates it all for you on the fly. It wouldn't, it's definitely within the realm of what we can do with this, and it wouldn't even be too hard.
Yeah, because I definitely find myself sometimes going, this might be easier to write in CSS than to go find all the buttons. That's one thing. The other thing might be, I guess, exporting and importing. I know you can just go to the default tools, export, and we can export all these global styles here, but it's going to export every one of them. And then when you want to import them, it's going to import every one of them. So some kind of system in here to be able to export and import selected ones would be cool. The other idea would be like, what if I just what if I had a CSS file that I wrote just in plain CSS to be able to open that in here and bring all those selectors in so I could enqueue them into the editor so they would show up when I did a search form, right? So that way I could start off with my own unique child theme CSS file essentially, but be able to enqueue all those into the editor. That would be a pretty cool feature.
Yeah, Yeah, and it's totally possible. There'd have to be some pretty advanced parsing going on, especially if you're just going to give it, you know, this kind of static string of CSS. But the cool thing about it is that your browser actually interprets CSS as like a JavaScript object. So totally possible.
Excellent. All right. Let's see. Let's go back to our changelog here and see what else we got. What else did we get to? So adding the indicators. Man, okay. I know, I want to say I know who put in a feature request for this, but keeping the P tag when you convert from the core paragraph block to the headline block, my God, this has already saved me so much time, and I'll show you how simple and silly this is, but it's really cool, and I'm sure you've all done this. So let's just say you start typing some text. I'm going to put some website Ipsum in here. When you click on this to switch it over to the headline block, because you want all the controls that GenerateBlocks gives you, and core blocks don't do that, you know what's going to happen when I click on this. It's automatically going to change it to an H2. So then I got to click the tag and change it to a paragraph. But now when we change it, it automatically detects that and keeps it a paragraph. That is a simple line on the changelog, but it is near and dear to my heart, that one.
Yeah, most of this changelog is you, by the way. So
well, I didn't do that one. I think Taylor might be responsible for that one.
Yeah.
And this one's very similar, using the arrow keys to increase or decrease values. I can't tell you how many times I clicked into one of these and started pressing up and down and was unable to do that. Now, I'm not a huge advocate for willy-nilly just picking random values, but when you just kind of nudge things around, this is really, really helpful. I really like that one.
Feature. Thank you, David, for that feature, if he's listening.
That's a good one. That's a really, really good one. See, we're getting hallelujahs and everything in the chat here. All right. I guess we'll leave features we'll stick with features and leave everything else out of here. I think that's everything in the free version. Let's see if use core patterns. We did that. Add collection. We talked about that. Feature, add necessary accessibility attributes to tabs and accordions by default. I know this got brought up inside the admin bar, and Amber Hines from Equalize Digital looked at it, and she had pointed out a few things. So do you want to talk on that at all?
Yep. She came and wrote up an awesome issue, and I went through and fixed it all up. And the cool thing about it is a lot of those things were actually, you know, all you had to do was add the necessary HTML attributes using the HTML attributes feature. But obviously, it should do it by default when you add it to the page. So we went ahead and did that. There was one bug fix in the front end JavaScript between like area expanded and area selected. So that should all be nicely tightened up and completely accessible.
Excellent. Well, I like to hear that. That's very good. And I got corrected. It was actually Sam that had that feature request and not Taylor. So I want to give the right shout outs here. All right. So let's see. I think that takes us through all of the changelog stuff. So let's talk about if I can bug you for a little bit longer to ask you a few questions.
Bug away.
All right. We still got 130 people watching. So we're going to get into the weeds and a little bit of this nerdy stuff and the future of GenerateBlocks. Like you talked about earlier with the global styles, like this is a lot of foundational stuff that sets you up for the future. I'm going to ask some questions that maybe you decide you don't want to answer here, and that's cool. I won't hold you to it, but I got to at least ask. Because the future one's a little bit, or this first one is a little bit easier. You've introduced some new, more complex controls into GenerateBlocks, and I'm wondering if the avatar for the ideal GenerateBlocks user has changed. Has the landscape changed? Are you guys targeting people maybe more like me or the people watching the stream that want to do more advanced things? Or how do you think about the perfect user for GenerateBlocks? And I preface this by, and I know this is the longest question ever, if Kevin's still watching, one of his huge complaints about WordPress itself is it's trying to be for everyone. So it's really hard to actually do something that it needs to do because it's trying to be for everyone. I imagine you don't want to go down that road.
Oh, Kevin, I'm going to upset you. But this is kind of what I kind of talked about earlier as well, was now that we have the engine, and it is a Ferrari engine, like it is something special. Now that we have the engine, it should make, you know, people like you really, really happy, where you can just come in and do pretty much whatever you want in there without going somewhere else to creating the CSS and then having to add that CSS to the editor somehow, which isn't always an easy process. So you can just do it right there. So that should make, the advanced user very, very happy. Now, if we're able to add the correct patterns and the correct safety nets within the local blocks and maybe within global styles, eventually it'll be, you can turn it off if you want. So I won't upset you there. But I truly believe that we can somehow kind of cater to both groups, because obviously there are a lot of people who don't know what they're doing that just want a really simple website, and we should be able to give them that. And whether that's through a pattern library like we have, through a site library like GeneratePress has, where we can kind of tie all these things in together. The beautiful thing about having the engine that we have is we can do all this stuff that we need to do. We're not limited at all. We've always said GenerateBlocks, a few blocks that can build nearly anything. It's true now, like you can really do anything with these things. There's a few things we have to tighten up on the individual block side of things with the elements and stuff, but we're really trying to get to that point where we have a full-fledged page builder that, the advanced users can really take advantage of, but there can also be a layer for the not advanced users to build out their site. So having that engine gives us the ability to add a simple layer on top of it.
And I know Max just brought this up here too. That's something that's come up before too. When we do hand over these sites to clients, I don't know that I really want them editing a class. You know what I mean? So I think some of that's already built into the editor roles. But do you foresee trying to put guardrails on some of these more advanced features so people don't accidentally do the wrong thing? Not just, my clients don't want to mess it up,
Yeah. And they shouldn't even be tempted to. So right now, the only people that can add and edit these styles are admins. It is a simple filter if you want to change that. In the future, I think there should be a UI where you can turn these things on and off for the individual user roles. When we introduce the new inspector controls from global styles into the local block, it'll make that really simple to do, because we will have styles. These are styles, and only X users should be able to mess with these. And these are block controls, and we can kind of categorize those out as well. Maybe you want the client to be able to change the icon, for example, but not the size. Maybe you want certain things, but not other things. I think it's really important as we move forward to kind of build that UI into the system, so that you can really guardrail a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I love that idea. All right. Like I said, kind of at the beginning of the stream, you just gave us 99% of what all of us were asking for. But I'm curious to know what features are next now that you have these things in place and the world did not blow up. What's your next step here?
Well, this particular feature is nice because it doesn't care about the blocks. What we didn't show, for example, which one of your videos showed, is you had the breadcrumbs, which you can style, the individual breadcrumbs, which isn't GenerateBlocks, and it works for that too. So what I want to do and start doing is a lot of our features, for example, dynamic content, I don't really necessarily want those features to be tied to our blocks. I would like a lot of these features to just be, plug into the system and work. Because in the future, what I'd like is for our individual blocks to just be HTML tag names that really don't care. And then we're just talking about HTML tag names and CSS. So I want to get rid of as much of the opinion as I possibly can, and as much of that connection that I possibly can. So, dynamic content is something we're going to be looking at, especially a tighter integration with things like WooCommerce with our dynamic content, and anything, ACF, whatever you want. I have an idea for dynamic content that I think would be super, super powerful and really extendable. So I'd like to kind of go there. The query loop needs a little bit of love. We got to get rid of that grid block, because in the future it's not going to be necessary. So what the future holds here, now that we have the style engine, is we can start adding a lot of these features that people have been asking for, that I've been holding off on because I knew what we were trying to do from a very base level. Now that we have that foundation, we can start kind of chipping away at a lot of these things, but in the right way. I could have just added WooCommerce support and added this support and added that support and kept piling on, but it would have been a mistake because the foundation wasn't where it needed to be. Now that we have the foundation where it needs to be, we can really take this thing to the next level with all kinds of features, which I'm really excited about. You can think about like carousels. Like you can do carousels almost, CSS only. One of our patterns in there has the overflow set on. If you're on, if you have a trackpad, it's already hooked up and ready to go. So a lot of these things now we can very easily start creating new features. And what I want to do is stop with these massive 8-month long feature sprints because they're exhausting. I'm very tired and I don't want to do it again. What we want to do is start doing these, once a month feature releases that, give us the things that we need to build these websites the way we want to do them, but have it so the code that it's outputting is like, you can't get better. And that's what's so cool about the styles engine that we built is the code. It's up to you how much you add. It's not up to us. We don't add anything for you. By default, there's nothing. There's no opinion. You don't get my opinion. You don't want my opinion. Just you add the CSS that you need and off you go. And we'll be able to use that method with all of our features moving forward.
Yeah, and I know a lot of the questions we get, I don't use WooCommerce, so I never ask you WooCommerce questions, but the people who do definitely want more WooCommerce stuff. I know a lot of the stuff I've talked about with you is on the ACF side, being able to bring in more dynamic content and do things like repeaters, which would be really, really helpful. But I wonder how much you've looked at, and this got brought up inside your group as well, the new interactivity API and the block bindings API, because both of these things could play really well into what we were just talking about for dynamic stuff. Like maybe you're able to tap into what WordPress core is doing for those things.
Yeah, and if we're able to, like what we just did with the post type stuff that I was talking about, we definitely will. Block binding stuff, it's relatively new, I think. I've looked at it a little bit. It's really similar to what our dynamic content feature does right now, except our dynamic content can do a lot more. Now, I know block bindings, it's a new thing that they're working on, so it will get a lot more powerful as time goes on. I'm not sure it's the right thing for dynamic content. I know you're really big into using template tags or short codes because it's what they are. So maybe that's the direction. I'm not sure. So only time will tell with that one. But we already have a pretty powerful dynamic content system if what you're wanting to do is replace the entire output of your content, which I believe is what block binding does right now, at least. The interactivity API looks super cool. Again, we're going to be looking at this with the query loop next for things like, loading the next post without refresh, that kind of stuff. It's going to come down to, performance and flexibility. Does it make sense to load a library that can do everything in order to do one small thing? Or does it make sense to load less than a kilobyte of code to do that same thing? We need to look at these kind of things moving forward about, does it make sense? It may make sense if you're doing a handful of things on the same page using that API. Then you might be looking at some sort of net gain when it comes to the size. It may not make sense if what you're loading is like 500 bytes instead of, loading the entire API for 10 kilobytes. But at the same time, it's not a huge size. So we're going to be looking at this and kind of weighing the pros and cons of it. And
yeah, I think that's the interesting decision you have to make on a lot of these things. So one of the things I wrote about in my list of questions here is, it seems like a lot of the new features coming to core are coming specifically for block themes, for the full site editing experience. So a good example of that is the new font manager, which I think comes out in the next version of WordPress. But if you're using a classic theme like GeneratePress, you're not going to have the ability to use that in your theme. I imagine that's just one of what will eventually be a million examples. just like once they went all in on the block editor, all the new updates were for the block editor, not for the classic editor, right? So I'm imagining now all the new goodies that get packed into core are going to get bundled into full site editing and block themes. So you deciding where you leverage what they already have versus you think you can do it better becomes more and more difficult as there becomes a divide there. So what are your thoughts on the direction of FSE, and do you see you guys going more down that path? Or
I mean, it's kind of a shame, right, that a lot of these features are kind of being kept for one part of it and not the other. It is going to create a divide. What's wrong with a hybrid theme? GeneratePress was the first, I think, block-based theme using the elements feature. You can already do inside GeneratePress what you can do in full site editing. Is the UI is nice? No, probably not. Is it a fixable problem? Definitely. I showed you before we jumped in here. You said something the other day that sparked something, and I started messing around, and I think it would be a massive improvement to the elements feature. Things like local fonts, if they're not going to make it available to everybody, that's fine. We'll just create our own. If we can create a full site editing theme that, can do everything GeneratePress can do, and there's a huge benefit there when it comes to performance and usability, why not? Cool idea. However, every time I've jumped in to try and do it, I run into some sort of problem that is going to make that really difficult. And again, the net gain you're going to get from that versus a theme like GP, it's not massive. So if we can take GP and we can improve the elements feature to be more like full site editing, and doing that turn off a lot of the other things inside GP that you don't need, I don't see, that just seems like a win-win for me, because there's already the ecosystem. People are already using it and know it. So, it's obviously something that we talk about a lot internally. And like I said, I've built a couple of full site editing themes just as kind of tests. I've thrown some display rules stuff in there and things like that to see if I can make a GP full site editing theme. And it may happen one day, but I don't think it is a massive, we need to do it right now. I mean, I don't think GeneratePress itself I think it's already a hybrid theme. And I think there's a lot of people that don't want to mess with the block editor as well. They just want things the way they were. And GP does that excellently. And if you want to do it the block way, if we improve the elements UI, then that's beautiful too. You can go in and build the whole theme using elements, using blocks, using our styles builder. And, for me, it's a win-win. As long as we can keep performance good and keep the UI quiet, we don't want, like you were saying the other day, we don't want to build something with blocks and have all this noise with these controls that don't do anything anymore. So you need to be able to have kind of both those things into one package. And I think it's totally possible.
Yeah, and I think obviously GeneratePress has been around longer than a lot of people have been building with WordPress. Probably a lot of people watching this stream, because GeneratePress has been around, 10 years at this point? It's been around.
It's 10 years in May, I think.
Yeah, that's basically ancient in terms of WordPress products, right? So there's a lot of legacy built into that there's still people running websites that aren't messing with blocks and all that, right? So you have to be careful of all that. But I think what we're running into now is GenerateBlocks can do like 95% of everything. Yep. There's still a few places where you have to get into GeneratePress to do things. So things like setting your theme colors, right? Because all those variables are going to be set inside the customizer, or in queuing fonts, which is something we're still doing inside GeneratePress right now. But there's not many things left on that list. I just imagine that soon GenerateBlocks would be able to do most of that stuff, and then what we're left with is kind of the elements feature. So it's interesting how those might be more tightly integrated, because I feel like a lot of the questions that I field as just somebody who makes content on your products, a lot of the questions I get are confusion as to where stuff goes into GeneratePress and where it goes into GenerateBlocks, and like, why does it work that way? And I'm like, well, if you would have started 10 years ago and like been with us the whole time, you would see how that happened. But yes, just coming in today, that's a little confusing and it doesn't make a ton of sense, you know?
Yep. And I have the solution for that, I believe. And the cool thing, the reason GeneratePress is 10 years old and it's still relevant and people can still use it is because it's done such a good job of getting out of the way. You know, whether it was when Elementor first hit the scene and you know, people started using GP because GP would get out of the way. You know, you want a full page and you don't want our styles conflicting with your styles. It's done that so well over the years. And I think that's the answer here as well. If we can get GP to get out of the way and be as light as it possibly can be, which has always been what we've been trying to do, you want to let a builder build. And GenerateBlocks does that. It builds, right? So if GP, because at this point in WordPress, we still need a theme. If GP can be that theme and it can and it can get out of the way and let GB do what it's supposed to do, to me, it's a huge win. And it would be kind of pointless to put a ton of hours into like a full site editing theme if you get the same result anyways using GP. I mean, the future here is we want to build websites and we want to build them the way we want, and we want the code to be light. And GenerateBlocks does that really well. And it's going to be GeneratePress's job to get out of the way and allow GenerateBlocks to do what it does and put things where it wants to put things. And GP historically has done that really, really well. Now we just need to go further with that. Like GeneratePress needs to further get out of the way. If you're using a site footer element, I don't want to see a copyright feature in my customizer because it doesn't work and it doesn't make any sense, right? So the idea that I showed you before we jumped on here will facilitate that. It will allow us to go, hey, you're using this, so we're going to turn off all this. And all of a sudden, you're going to be looking at a theme. Think like what's the Elementor theme? Hello, whatever, right? Think that. Let GP get out of the way. Let GenerateBlocks build. And I think that's the future here. But at the same time, we don't ostracize a huge amount of our users who don't want to build that way. And maybe they don't want, if you just want to blog, like, do you need all this stuff?
Right.
Not really, right? You can just use GP the way it is and off you go. And if you just want a really simple site where you're not building, you know, full page heroes and pricing tables, like GP can do that too. So I think that's always been the beauty of GP. And I don't really see that changing. I just think it's cool now that we have our own builder, because if you would have told me when Elementor came out and Beaver Builder and all these guys, if you would have told me that we would have our own system in 5 years, like I'm super proud of what we have here. And I think now we have these two things that can, you know, work together really, really well.
Absolutely. And it's funny because I do end up on a lot of blogs that I recognize. I'm like, hey, this is just using the default GeneratePress theme. And they got 7,000 posts on their blog. I'm like, hey, this is working perfectly, you know?
I'll go looking for a recipe and I'm like, hey, I think I know this.
Yeah.
This theme. Yeah.
No doubt. All right. I want to hit some of these audience questions. So if anybody's been holding questions, drop them in the chat now. If I didn't get to it, I don't have a list. It doesn't let me copy and paste these out of here. So you'll have to drop them back in if you need them in here. But Francisco inside the GenerateBlocks group said he was dreaming of an AI integration. Any chance we see something like that from GenerateBlocks?
So AI is kind of a funny one, right? Because there's like really useful AI and then there's not so useful AI, but either way you get to use that cool little icon and people go, oh, AI.
Yeah.
So we're actually working on
50% of copies by adding the AI icon.
Yeah. So we're actually working on a really simple AI implementation that I think will help a lot with like wireframing. So for example, you're writing out a headline, you can just get it to put in the headline. I think AI can be really helpful when it comes to style building. If you were to say like, add a background image to this section for me, and it uses uses our system to do that if you train it properly. But I don't think, like, I think a lot of the AI stuff right now is noise and hype and stuff like that. And I don't want to dive too much into that because I don't think there's a ton of value there. However, for simple things like the image block, if you can add an image and you can tell it to go fetch you an image that relates to your content, I think for a lot of new users to the game who are just trying to create their own website, maybe they're a gardener or whatever, I think this kind of stuff can be really useful because they can very easily just wireframe out their site and get it really close. And then maybe they can go get a copywriter to come clean it up, or they can go, I think it can be really helpful for wireframing. I don't think it can build your site for you.
Not yet.
But yeah, there's things about it that can be really helpful. And then there's things about it that I think are kind of lipstick on a pig type of stuff.
Yeah. So I can tell by the type of audience we have watching this stream. We have a lot of not so in the camp of AI things here. So I would say definitely a feature in there that allowed us to turn that off or not show it in the UI would be a thumbs up from a lot of us.
Yeah.
Brent, go ahead.
And it's not going to be something integrated with the actual blocks. Like I said earlier, we're getting away from that. The block should be an HTML tag, and the things that are really specific to that and all this other stuff should be things like global styles where it lives somewhere else and communicates with the thing. And obviously something like that could be turn offable. And AI is tricky too, because it costs money. Like it costs money for us to make those requests. So what do? We charge for credits, and now people have to buy credits. It's super, super complicated.
Yeah. Okay, Brent asked in here, can there please be a way to add a container that already has a section tag so I don't have to go down to the advanced section and change it for each section? Now, I showed you earlier my little workaround for that, and I'll be glad to show it again if we need to, but what are your thoughts on that?
Add a pattern. That's exactly what they're for, right? If you're going to need a section and then you're going to need it a lot, create a pattern, set it to your tag name. And every time that you type in section, it's like you're creating your own block, basically. That's 100% the way to do that. Yeah. You don't want us adding a bunch of features like this. You don't want us creating a section block just to do that when it can be totally up to you, because then you can do your own things about that section block as well. You can add more than just the section tag.
Right. So I'm trying to show you here, Brent, in case you missed earlier what I do. I will add a container. I'm going to go down here and change this section. I'm going to do this one time and one time only and never have to do it again, which is great. I can add a class to this. So I could just say, like, I've already put section dash default or something. So let's say demo dash section. I'm going to go ahead and give that a class in case I want to do some styles to it, which I do. On any section, I'm probably going to want an inner container. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. And I might want to put a demo wrapper on that just in case. Go ahead and say okay to that. Here on my outside container here, I'm just going to add some pixel values here. But essentially, I've created, okay, this is going to be the default style for a section on my website. So imagine you do everything you want to that. You can then go here and create a pattern. You can say demo section. Obviously, you're not going to call it demo. And I can't remember if I have to save all this and refresh or not, so I'm going to do it anyways. But now, instead of having to build a section like that, like I just did from scratch, I can just start typing demo section. It comes up right here in the block inserter. I add it. Here it is. It's already labeled a section, which is great. It has my demo section class on it, and the wrapper inside of it has my demo wrapper class. So what I'm working on right now, as I'm playing with these alpha versions, is creating a bunch of these, like, they're essentially blocks, even though they're patterns. They're kind of like having an extra block here. So I have like a section default, a section small, a section extra large. So I have different padding values on it. And then for the wrapper inside, I have my default wrapper that comes in a section by default, but I have, utility classes for a more narrow width or whatever. So I can essentially add a section to this with pressing / and I have a bunch of different variant options off the bat without having to clutter our UI up with a bunch of extra blocks, essentially.
You are generating blocks with the GenerateBlocks.
There you go. Meta. All right. So hopefully that answered that question for you. Let's see. Kelly asks, is there a timeline for release?
Yeah, so I mean, typically what we do with an alpha, this alpha phase is to see if we missed anything major. Are we going to have to break something? And if we are, and you have been using it to create a new framework with all your stuff like Kyle has, then you're going to have to redo some stuff if we have to undo it, because we're not going to put a ton of work into backwards compatibility. So alpha, typically I like to give it 2 weeks-ish. This one's going quite well. We had a couple fixes on Friday. There's a couple that came in over the weekend. Not too much going on. I might look at some @rule stuff I have in mind that may be breaking kind of stuff, but better for the future. I'm not too sure. But yeah, I mean, this week for alpha, I think would be good. Then we can kind of start really heading towards a release. So we'll have a beta release that could maybe be like a week release candidate for a week or two, see if anything comes up. To your point, maybe I think for sure 100%, early April, hopefully first week of April.
Excellent. Here's a question that I think I asked you too is, are we missing the control for row span when we're using CSS Grid? Because we do have the column span.
We sure are.
Okay.
Yep, we're missing it. And like I said, it's going to take me 30 seconds to add it.
All right. Well, we'll time you.
I should do it right now.
Yeah. Let's just watch you do it. We'll share your screen. You can add it to it right now. Kelly also asked in here, I wonder what percentage of your user base are beginners building their own site. Do you have any statistics on that? Like, man, I tend to think, because I'm in the admin bar all the time dealing with other agencies, that everybody doing this is an agency doing this. I know that's not the case.
Yeah, no, I really wish I did. And then if anyone has any sort of magic out there that will help me, create segments within our user base so I can figure this out, please let me know. It's really hard. It's really hard to know. Our support forum is an indicator. There is definitely a lot of people using site library sites, starting their sites that way. And there's obviously a lot of agencies out there and a lot of developers out there, where this is, because that's where I was. That's why I started it. It was just supposed to be a shortcut for me building out these new sites. So we have a really good mix. If I had good numbers, I could do some pretty cool things, all that marketing that I love to do. But I really don't know, other than the indicators we get from the support forum.
Yeah. And I imagine that's skewed as well, because people who aren't as familiar with all these things are going to have a lot more questions than the people who are. So
exactly. And, we're never going to see people in there that are really comfortable with this stuff and understand it right away. So
we got a good question here too. We might end it on this one. Was Pedro Martinez the best trade the Expos ever made?
I met Pedro Martinez when I lived in Montreal when I was younger. Man, what a pitcher.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. Your answer is yes.
Yes, there you go. I was supporting my Rangers with the cup here today, even though we've moved to Virginia. I'm going to keep supporting them.
Have to.
Yeah, especially I move and then they win a World Series. What are you going to do?
I wish we had a baseball team here. Get me to the U.S., guys. Come on.
Well, there might be reasons to stay in Canada. So. Well, sweet. Well, we've already ate up an hour and a half of your time, and I don't see any more questions. As soon as I say that, more might come in, but I'll let you go for now. But I definitely want to do this again. I think one of the huge things I heard you talk about today was obviously setting this foundation took a lot of time and energy to get everything in place, but hopefully some more smaller, frequent updates as time goes on. So I would definitely love to make this a regular occurrence here. We held about 100 people captive for an hour and a half, which I think is pretty awesome here. So they must have been enjoying it. So I appreciate everybody hanging out and all that.
I really appreciate it. I really appreciate having everyone here. And hopefully I was able to be, clear and helpful with a lot of this stuff. I know that we don't do enough when it comes to communication. And that's, I'm not a marketing guy. I don't like social media. I'm not out there enough. I am trying to fix it, get some more voices out there. And I'm totally willing to do this kind of stuff more often as we keep going. So communication is something we're going to try to do a lot better here in 2024.
Well, I'll keep bugging Tom on the other side of this, so we'll make sure we'll hold him accountable for that one.
Yep.
Well, sweet. Well, thank you guys very much. I appreciate it. And y'all go test out the alphas and the betas as it goes through that process. Make sure to report any issues you see so we make sure this all goes clean when it gets launched. And if anybody else has any questions or anything, drop them inside the admin bar and we'll be happy to answer them. All right. Y'all have a good one. And we'll talk to you soon.
I appreciate you guys. Bye.